joining us for the first time today. Welcome. You're going to see right now that we are going to be recording this. If you would not like to have your video recorded, you can just turn your video off. We've got another exciting lineup today, and hope that you guys had some time yesterday evening and this morning to reflect some on yesterday. And we look forward to maybe in the chat if you have any questions that have come up for you since then, or things that you found especially inspiring, let us know. And then we've got some time for some breakout sessions later today, and we've got a few themes already that we'll share with you guys of themes for the breakout sessions. But if there's anything else that you're interested in, burning questions you have, let us know. So we're going to get started right off because we've got a full agenda today. Our first speakers today are James Keach and Emily Kirk, who are both extension agents over on the island of Kauai and are part of a great endeavor called the UH Seed Hui, and are going to tell us some about that, as well as some work that they are doing with participatory breeding. And I think you guys will all join me in being very excited that we've got some great young, new, innovative extension agents helping us advance seed in the state. So we'll turn it over to these guys, and that'll be our first presentation, and then we'll just go through the agenda, which you guys all have. So welcome everyone, and welcome James and Emily.
Great. Aloha everyone. Great to see you all. I'm going to try and share screen here, and then when I wrap up, I'll pass it off to James. All right, does that look good? Perfect.
Great.
Awesome, thank you. Great, well again, aloha everyone. My name is Emily Kirk, and as Jay mentioned, I'm an extension agent based on Kauai, focused on edible crops. And today, I just want to say mahalo for the opportunity to speak with you all. I want to share a little bit about our recently formed CTAR extension seed saving hui, and also share some of the results from our recent needs assessment across the state. So this is a group we just formed in 2020, kind of out of a confluence of needs and interests, all related to seed, which felt especially urgent during the beginning of the pandemic, as I'm sure many of you can relate to. So our group consists of extension agents across the state, and it's an interdisciplinary team. So some folks more on the family and consumer sciences side, and then a number more on the agriculture side as well. For Kauai, it's myself, James Keach, and Haley Cristobal. On Oahu, Christine Hanakawa, Joshua Silva, Amjad Ahmad, and Soti Ang and Jensen Ueda. On Molokai, Jennifer Hawkins and Glenn Tevis. Maui is Nancy Ooki. And then on Hawaii Island, we have Marielle Hampton, Becky Setledge, and Kylie Tavares. So the objectives of our group are really to increase awareness of the importance of seed for food security, also to increase knowledge of seed saving practices among both youth and adults in Hawaii, and increase capacity for seed education and seed production. Also to expand existing seed saving activities and initiatives through outreach and education, and to increase interest in participatory plant breeding to select locally adapted cultivars, which James will talk a little bit more about in the next talk. So our vision is really to build on this awesome foundation from the Hawaii Public Seed Initiative, the Seed Growers Network, Go Farm, and others who've done so much great work and continue to do such great work across the state. And we'd like to establish an annual seed saving training that would be kind of a seed saving 101, as well as train the trainers for garden educators, including master gardeners, and also advanced workshops on special topics, focusing on also youth engagement and bringing youth in throughout wherever there are opportunities, and then partnering and building networks and supporting infrastructure, including access to seeds, but also tools and equipment. So we started with a needs assessment last year, and this was an online survey from August to November, and mahalo to all of you who completed this and added your voices to this information here. The objective is really just to inform our group so that we can make sure our initiatives really work to improve the knowledge gaps and the capacity in the state as needed. And the long-term goal is to increase the selection, development, and popularization of better adapted local crop varieties. So I apologize, this presentation will probably have the least photos of any that we see during the summit, but I wanted to share some of this data with you all. So this is kind of some of the preliminary results from this, and we'll share the report out with everyone as well. But real quick, respondent demographics. So we had about 104 respondents from across all islands, pretty well distributed, and a pretty even breakdown, as we see on the left, between beginner seed savers and experienced folks. And of the experienced producers, we had over about 46% who had 10 or more years of experience. And as far as the role as a grower, again, on the demographics, these are categories how people would best sort themselves or characterize themselves. And we saw a large number of home gardeners, also farmers, and a good representation from educators, some researchers, and master gardeners and Go Farm participants as well. And throughout, the green are the beginner and the purple bars are going to represent the more experienced seed savers and seed growers. So for folks who are not saving their own seed, we were curious where they are sourcing seed currently. So these are the beginners or folks who might just be interested. And the majority of them are buying their seed from local stores. So that would be seed racks at hardware stores, or for example, and also a large percentage coming from out-of-state online seed suppliers, good representation from the UH Seed Lab, a lot of folks getting seed from friends, also seed swaps, seed libraries, and the Hawaii Seed Growers Network, and then a few from other sources. And we asked folks how big of a seed saving project they might be interested in, or how big their current operation is. And we saw that the majority of folks are looking at pretty small operations. So that would be less than 1,000 square feet, for example. And just a few folks looking at bigger projects than that. And so that's really helpful when we are trying to gauge the types of information and tools, equipment, things like that that might be relevant. Again, we're looking at these kind of smaller scales. And for the experienced growers, we're curious what the current market or end use for the seed that they're saving is. And folks were able to select multiple categories here. We see a lot of people saving seed for personal use. Also for public or community distribution, for food security or educational use, and only about 25% or 30% of current growers who are actually selling any amount of their seed currently. But we saw that a lot of folks, and again in the experienced category, are very interested in expanding their seed production. So 78% said that they would like to expand, which is really encouraging. And of those, we saw that a large number were interested in expanding for seed sales. So even though maybe only about 30% are currently selling, that there are a lot of folks who are interested in expanding into that space. And a lot of folks also interested in expanding their production for sharing and for exchange, and then some who are mostly interested in networking and having the community around it. So some of the current challenges and barriers to seed saving practices and production, there's a lot to look at here, but just to kind of key it out, again, the green bars are the beginning folks. And we saw that the main limitation for beginning seed savers was knowledge, also access to equipment, and then time. But comparing that to the more experienced folks, we see that time really comes out as the #1 limitation. which is not surprising, right? You can think about that as growers, that time and labor are challenges. Also, weather was reported much more frequently by the experienced growers than by the beginners, which also makes sense. I'm sure once they get into it, then they will understand how challenging the weather can be. And we saw, interestingly, equipment and infrastructure as well being two big areas where there's a barrier to production. So looking at that types of equipment, what might make the process more efficient? Again, from the experienced growers, winnower and thresher came out as the most frequent response, but also dryer and dehumidifier. So this is really helpful to us as we're thinking about starting to build maybe shared equipment spaces or tool libraries on things that we could offer, again, probably at a pretty small scale, but that might help to make a difference for folks. Also things like greenhouse, screening, netting, fencing, some of those things came into play as well for protected spaces for growing. So current sources of information that folks are looking at, again, these are stacked bars, but the green are the beginners, the purple is experienced. So a lot of people are looking online. And again, online is very broad, and acknowledge that, but that's the primary source that people are really going to these days to access. Also, a lot of people asking more experienced growers, so that could be mentors, neighbors, friends, relying on books. We know there's some really excellent books out there on seed saving and seed production, and that was especially common among the more experienced folks. CTAR and seed companies, OSA, of course, and then some others. And some folks mentioned that they don't have a source of information as well. So definitely would like to fill that gap and find a way to connect with those people. So we also asked folks what the current top crops they are growing. And there's a lot. We didn't specify how to categorize these in the question. So answers were kind of all over the board, but we sorted them and ranked them into this word cloud here just to get an idea kind of at a glance. And these are the experienced growers. We see some of the common things: lettuce, beans, tomato, peppers really, and flowers really popping out at the top of the list. And of the top crops of interest, things that, again, the experienced growers are looking at, the most common response was more. So more of the things that I'm already growing, more of the things that are well adapted here, more of the things that are pest resistant, things that we already have a good system set up for. We just want to expand and do more diversity, but also more as in more quantity. But some of the other categories that came out on top, flowers were very popular, vegetables, of course, being broad, but lettuce, tomatoes, herbs, beans, and a lot of folks mentioned as well wanting to expand the UH cultivars. And areas for support that survey respondents were interested in, again, the green here are the beginners. So things like educational resources and training programs to meet that knowledge gap, but also a lot of interest in hosting events and networking opportunities. So mahalo to the Seed Growers Network and everyone for putting on this summit today, because I think that is definitely meeting a need that a lot of people are looking for. I'll also note that on here, cultivar releases was a pretty frequent mention as well, both by beginner and experienced folks. So looking for new cultivars that are well adapted. And a couple quotes from the comments, just to get some of the flavor. Some expert seed savers had said to host and promote local seed exchanges and distribute links to educational materials online. Also figure out ways to connect immigrant farmers and new wave farmers to share varieties, experience, and market outlets. And that I would like to see more programs that accommodate the working individual. So perhaps more videos or recordings As a high school educator, how can I get more resources for students in seed saving? And I think seed saving is a major component of a healthy food system. Improving varieties for our unique island conditions is critical. So with that, just want to say mahalo nui to all of you and all of those in our ever-growing seed community for being here and for doing all the amazing work that you do.
Thank you, Emily.
Awesome. Can y'all see me at my slides all right?
Looks good.
Yes.
All right. So thank you, Emily, for talking about that. I'm going to try to be a little bit of a bridge between Emily's presentation and Marielle's presentation, talking today a little bit about extension and a role it could play in participatory breeding to get some more locally adapted cultivars that kind of fit into that need Emily was talking about. Again, I'm James Keach. I'm the Kauai Assistant Extension Agent for Ornamental Crops, and I'm also the Master Gardener Coordinator for Kauai. But my background's in plant breeding and kind of in that whole, in a hammer's world, everything snails. I see plant breeding as something that can fix a lot of local challenges with food production and with ornamental plant production. So just in terms of a little bit of history, the university has been involved in breeding for well over 100 years. There's pretty good documentation going back. And most of the folks here are probably pretty familiar with the cultivars that the university has released, most of which were bred by kind of these three gentlemen over here. Jim Brubaker, who just passed away last year, Jim Gilbert, and then Rich Hamilton. And I think, you know, we appreciate how well these cultivars do locally, but also they form a really strong basis for cultivars across the world. Dr. Brubaker's corn is used all throughout the tropics and things descended from it. He also trained, I'd say, at least half of the tropical corn breeders out there. And the tomato cultivars that we're so used to here are also important sources of things like spider mite resistance, biotic stress resistance that are used in breeding programs still. Fortunately, in the last few decades, we've seen a lot of the kind of funding start to dry up for breeding since it's sort of a long-term project. While one of the things I hear most when I mention I'm from CTAR is that folks want new cultivars, we don't see a lot of this resulting in breeder positions. It comes up as a good idea, it gets into strategic plans, it doesn't kind of make it that next step. And so, you know, I want to put a caveat to this slide by saying, I think the ADSC does absolutely incredible work. They've managed to preserve a bunch of cultivars with a very tight budget, and they do a lot of outreach work. And it's not really their job to do breeding, but as I was looking through some of the cultivars that they offer over here on the right, you know, I started looking and you can see there's only 3, and this is not all inclusive. This is a good chunk of them, but only 3 of which were developed after the year 2000. I decided to average these just to get a rough idea of when they were released. Average was about 1979. Do a median of those years, it's even earlier, 1973. And in those intervening years, we've seen, you know, unfortunately, a lot of diseases and pests kind of get introduced to the state. I still think UH cultivars are great in that they have adaptation to a lot of things that folks on the mainland and even other parts of the tropics don't struggle with. But I think there's just so many things that have kind of gotten left behind. And this is just a small sampling of things I've heard from different growers and gardeners over the years. So what can we do? One thing that I think could really play a strong role in kind of getting new cultivars out there is participatory plant breeding. We hear a lot of things probably in the news, and I'm sure y'all have heard about, you know, local government, some discussion of the university and its role. But one thing that I think we can agree on is doing less things in silos and more things in the community. And participatory plant breeding, in its most basic sense, is basically just involving the community and farmers earlier in the process, not just doing the breeding at the university and then kind of releasing it and seeing how it does, but getting folks on board from the beginning. There's 2 different sort of subsections: participatory varietal selection, which is when you're going and actually looking at different cultivars, getting those out to the community for folks to test out, and then getting some kind of feedback from them about which ones did they like, which ones did they not like, and why. Then using information from that to do true participatory plant breeding, we're actually making crosses, getting some new diversity there, but keeping the farmers and community members involved from the very beginning. I read about this early on in Carol Depuy's Breed Your Own Vegetable Varieties book, but there's a lot of great sources here. I swear I didn't know Jim was actually going to be talking here, so this is a bit of a just coincidence having his picture. But this is from the Organic Seed Alliance's Participatory Plant Breeding Toolkit. They go into some details about how to kind of get this going on farms. One side effect that we've seen from participatory plant breeding is not only does it help create crops that are better adapted and have better acceptance, but also you tend to see a better baseline of diversity, meaning the crop's going to be a little bit more resilient as new pests and diseases get introduced. I wanted to talk real quick about a case study of how this has worked in other areas. So in Samoa, they had Taro leaf blight introduced, and anyone who's grown kalo here has probably encountered this, black spots on the leaves and kind of reduced yield. But unfortunately, in Samoa, they were mostly growing one cultivar, and they went from exporting $10 million worth each year to exporting less than 60,000. The university there decided to kind of put together a program on participatory plant breeding as a way to address this. And they did a really good write-up of it a few years after they succeeded, which I'll link to here. So what they did was they started out collecting cultivars and getting them out to the different growers around the islands. And so it was information that you can see their little chart here, but also leaving some space to get some more information. And it was good they did this because, you know, as you can imagine, university researchers don't always know exactly what the farmers are thinking. One category that's not on here, but that ended up being really important was storage life of taro corns. You know, they don't make them into poi as much, so they wanted cultivars that they knew were gonna do really well in terms of being able to store for a while in case they needed to get them to market later. And this is some guidelines that they talked about for setting up taro participatory breeding. They also put together a university breeding club where they brought farmers and growers and gardeners in and actually walk them through the breeding, but also would do selections. They had grow outs on campus where folks could come in and do the selections. And they even trained people from different countries to then get some perspectives and also get more material exchange. There's other different versions of this, and I'm not gonna try not to step on Marielle's toes too much, but you see this kind of bleeding over a little bit into the citizen science, or as a friend in Extension recently mentioned to me, community science, since we don't just want citizens participating in it. University of Florida does this with their tomatoes now. You can donate to their program and they'll send you established cultivars, but also some of their new breeding lines to try out. This is of interest, you know, because they're probably the closest in terms of conditions. I recently saw Kickstarters for new tomato breeding where they'll send you seed of some kind of like still in development tomato cultivars to try out. And you're also seeing breeders start to release things that are kind of in process. So this was a bean Grex that was released a few years ago, where you can see in the photo, it's still segregating for color and shape and a few other things. But basically you get it, and then as a farmer can kind of select for the diversity that does best on your location and thin it out then, rather than the diversity being lost earlier on, and then you just having something that's not quite as well adapted. Okay, you know, I've talked about this. How can we kind of get this going? I mean, I could sit here and talk all afternoon if you give me a chance. I'm at Chatter. But these are some ideas that I think are already sort of in process, but that maybe we can work on kind of strengthening. So seed saving education, I know Emily brought this up. We have the seed hui and doing some outreach such as train the trainer for different groups. With the master gardeners, I always am getting questions about seed saving. There's already other community groups such as Seeds of Honua that are doing this. And I know there's other groups too that want to kind of get in on it. Then, you know, we could go in so many different directions, but I think with the really great information we had from the survey, it's going to let us kind of narrow things down in terms of some key crops that we can start focusing on, get this process started rolling out, get the kinks resolved, and kind of get it going. So my thought would be then doing some participatory varietal selection, looking at some commercial checks, and then getting some new cultivars out there. Going through existing extension channels like Master Gardeners, 4-H, but also getting into community groups and occasionally, rewarding folks too, like even just with some like free seed or something for their feedback. After that, gathering that information, start to make those crosses. I think the university can lead the way in some ways with this, but I think just like I know Jim's given the talk later today on how to do these crosses, it's better if people have this information and can be doing it on their own, not just relying on us overeducated folks to do it. And then once we have kind of this diversity from these crosses, starting to do grow outs, getting cooperator growers who want to do it, maybe going into community gardens, and then doing field days, not just doing a field day of here this is, but here's a field of something that's segregated. Let's go and do selections as a group. What draws your eye? What do you really kind of like gravitate towards or against? And I put this picture here. Top one is from a bean trial that was done here. And it reminded me of a bean that was developed by Elwin Meader up at the University of New Hampshire. And he developed a dark purple bean because, he already had a bean project going on for breeding, but he was talking with his wife. And she said, the hardest thing she had with beans was being able to distinguish the dark bean greens from the dark green foliage. So we said, well, why don't we try a dark purple green bean that then will kind of stand out against the foliage. And it worked really well. It's still available today. So that's sort of information that you can really gather from field days. With that, I'm gonna turn things over and also drink some more tea. Thank you for your time. If you're interested in this, please feel free to reach out to me or any of the other folks in the Seed Hui. I am gonna be out of the country for the next 2 weeks, so I won't be responding to emails. But if you email me, I'll get back to you after April 13th or so. I'm hopeful that with all of the interest and really great energy from the seed community here, we can kind of get some more projects going and really integrate things. So thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, James. That is exciting to hear about what you guys are up to and so much potential. So that leads in well to our next presenters, who are Tyler Levine and Marielle Hampton, who are going to tell us some about Seeds of Honua, which James mentioned, and then also some examples of some community selection projects that we'll hear about. So Tyler's going to give us a little introduction, and then we'll watch a video, and then we'll hear a bit from Marielle.
Hey everyone, it's so wonderful to see you all today. I'm so thankful that we are in this space and creating this incredible place to dive into the future of seed. So I'm gonna briefly share my screen here and talk a little bit about Seeds of Honua, and then we will get into a video kind of piggybacking off of what James just spoke about in relation to citizen or community science. And then we will talk a little bit about future initiatives. And I just want to mention before I dive into this that Glenn and some other members of the Hawaii Seed Growers Network and of CTAR, including Marielle, have been an incredible just component in this project here. So share my screen. So aloha again, my name is Tyler. I'm the founder of Seeds of Honua, which is a youth-led, movement-based organization creating a brighter, healthier, more sustainable future of peace by connecting keiki to nature and empowering them to take action to respect and protect our Mother Earth. We envision a thriving seed-sharing network of youth and educators preserving seed sovereignty and biodiversity in Hawaii through the cultivation of seed-saving education, and various seed sharing networks across the state involving community members and our incredible intergenerational community. So it was really early fall of 2020 when this idea for Seeds of Honua manifested into a reality following the completion of the Kipuka competition, which is a virtual innovation challenge for youth with ideas to address local issues with place-based solutions. And that's hosted by Maya and STEMworks. Seeds of Honua really embarked on this journey of growth to begin planting seeds of change for a future of hope after the completion of that competition with some seed funding. So our team today includes representatives from the Oahu Farm to School Network, the Hawaii Seed Growers Network, CTAR, the Kohala Center, and more. And each member really brings a diverse set of passion, skill, and expertise to this incredible movement. And I'm very thankful and happy to say that for over a year or two, this movement has served the community in a variety of ways through multiple programs and initiatives, some of which we will touch upon today. This includes the Seed Sprint, Save Seeds, Save Our Future, a pilot program that we're currently launching for a seed exchange app. And if you're an educator and you're interested in what that may be, please go to our website, which I will put in the chat after I'm done screen sharing, and feel free to apply. Please, I encourage you to apply for this pilot program, which facilitates the exchange of seed between schools. And then later on in April, around April 30th, we'll be having a take 2 of Save Seeds, Save Our Future. So if you're interested in that, I can send along more information as well. But without further ado, I would like to hand the mic off to Rebecca to share screen and share our video on the experience we've had in the field of democratizing crop variety trialing. So, thank you. Aloha, peace builders, change makers, earth stewards, and seed planters. I am Tyler Levine, and I'm the founder of Seeds of Honua. I'm here today with Extension Agents Glenn Teves and Marielle Hampton from the University of Hawaii's College of Tropical Agriculture and Human Resources. We hope to take you on a journey today that follows the story of seed selection and variety trials through a citizen science program from beginning to end. This program, hosted by Seeds of Honua in partnership with UH-CTAR, really engaged a cohort of gardeners across the state of Hawaii who grew and selected individual tomato and pigeon pea plants best adapted to their specific growing conditions. We hope that the structure of this program and the lessons learned throughout can inspire and guide future citizen science initiatives focused on grower involvement in the plant breeding process.
The inspiration for this project came from Dr. Jim Myers, vegetable breeder at Oregon State University. At the last OSA conference, we discussed citizen science, and my knowledge of that label was new. But to a large extent, I was doing this with farmers for decades, conducting all kinds of trials in their fields. Jim and I have been developing new tomato varieties for a couple of years now, crossing Hawaii lines with his P20 lines. One of these crosses was a UH grape tomato, Komohana, crossed to one of Jim's recent varieties, Indigo Kiwi, a green wind ripe variety crossed to a P20 selection. I grew out the F1 and saved seed of the F2 for this project. The goal of this project was to provide an opportunity for gardeners to participate in the process of individual plant selection by exposing them to the processes used by seed breeders, as well as teaching them how to grow these crops. An added goal was instead of sending seeds back to us, to share their selections with friends and neighbors. A long-term vision was to train gardeners in trialing seeds, providing feedback, and saving seed from promising individuals. With Hawaii's varied climate, including rainfall ranges of 0 to 500 inches annually, growing elevations from sea level to 6,000 feet, over 160 different soil types, and temperature ranges from 40 to 90 degrees Fahrenheit, this program had the potential to identify selections from many of our microclimates.
The key components of this project include recruiting participants through outreach and networking efforts, distributing seed from selected varieties, supporting participants during the stages of plant growth with check-in meetings and resources, providing seed saving and sharing education to encourage seed distribution in the community, and soliciting participant feedback about their experience to improve future projects. We will now take a few minutes to review our process and share insights, challenges, as well as the many successes that we have encountered with our team's very first citizen science seed project. So to begin, we will look at recruitment. To recruit participants, we used a Google form with questions about registrants' climatic conditions, previous garden experience, and expectations for the citizen science program. The form was sent out through email lists and social media channels for gardening and seed-related groups, including Master Gardeners, the Hawaii Seed Growers Network, and School Garden Networks. In less than a month, about 80 people from around the state of Hawaii had signed up. By our first cohort meeting, though, only 50% of those people attended, and at the last meeting of the cohort 6 months later, approximately 25% of the people that initially signed up made it through the entire program. To ensure we weren't sending seeds to individuals without a way to follow up, we made the first meeting mandatory for participants that wanted to receive seed. Following signups, we mailed out the seeds and emailed participants a resource about unique considerations for planting a seed garden rather than food or ornamental gardens. Once everyone received their seed, we began a series of online meetings to check in and guide participants through the growing process.
Our team knew we needed to help our participants be successful so they would continue practicing what they learned. We did our best to provide tailored support with a quick turnaround time for questions and issues. We held monthly Zoom meetings to hear participant updates and respond to requests for help, and shared helpful resources like extension bulletins and fact sheets about growing the plants in Hawaii, making plant selections, and other topics that we reviewed during our meetings. We had an agenda for each meeting and enough team members to facilitate the discussion, manage the Zoom room, and answer questions as they came up. We also asked participants to use a website called Padlet to post photos of their plants each month, which was a fun way to see everyone's progress at a glance. While some of our participants were experienced gardeners, others needed help with the basics, like germinating seeds and managing pests. Our monthly meetings were a good opportunity to check in with the group and look for patterns in participant needs. If questions came up during the meeting, a facilitator would take notes and add the questions and answers to our running Q&A document. Participants were also encouraged to add their questions to the document before each meeting, so we had a chance to review what we should cover during the session. We usually asked attendees to use the Zoom chat function to ask questions, which helped quieter participants to weigh in and prevented chatty people from monopolizing the conversation. Once most of the tomato plants were fruiting, we also invited participants to join us in a live tomato seed saving demonstration to see and practice wet seed processing. For our next project, we plan to record our monthly meetings so people can revisit the content or view the session if they were absent.
Growers learned how to connect with the ecosystem of their garden and select qualities and traits beneficial for the plant's growth, appeal, and taste. The natural next step was to save seeds from selected plants. The original plan was to have participants send some of their saved seed back to Glenn, along with a description of expressed traits. Instead of taking this route, we decided to put the ownership of seed back into the hands of gardeners that grew them. This was a very powerful movement towards seed sovereignty. Participants were encouraged to plant a percentage of their saved seeds to continue the process of selection and eventually create their very own locally adapted tomato or pigeon pea variety. The rest of the seed was shared as gifts or donations to friends, family, neighbors, local schools or organizations, as well as other community outlets.
For our project evaluation, we were really interested in learning if participants found the format useful and which elements were the most helpful as they went through the process of growing out their plants and making selections. We conducted a simple post survey during our last meeting with about a 75% response rate for the active participants. 86% of respondents said they will save more seeds as a result of the project, and 66% plan to show or teach others more about seed saving. We asked about each element of the online format and found that the breakout rooms were often perceived as less helpful than other activities like the live demonstration and Padlet. Feedback from the comments showed us that the virtual platform was effective and enjoyable, especially for those in remote communities in Hawaii. Folks were grateful to be part of the project and eager for more opportunities to practice their skills and gather online. This project was a huge learning experience for our team, but several lessons stood out. Since the process was so new, we needed to be flexible in responding to unexpected challenges as they came up. For example, developing a Q&A system when basic gardening questions dominated our first check-in meeting. Our team could usually provide responses to participant questions within a few days, which can make a big difference to beginners by improving their chances of success. We also found that using online tools was crucial. Zoom breakout rooms and chat helped manage different personalities to make sure everyone had a chance to chime in. And the Padlet website created visual displays that kept participants engaged and excited about the project while providing a snapshot of the group's progress at a glance. We also lost about 75% of the initial signups over the course of the project, so we made our first meeting mandatory to avoid sending seeds to individuals that never participated further. Lastly, don't forget that if you're working with individuals in very different environments, they'll have very different challenges and needs to have a successful experience.
This program celebrates the special relationship between seeds and people, inviting our communities to connect with each other and their environment through planting, saving, and sharing seeds. We hope to continue creating opportunities to share the practice of seed saving with our Hawai'i community and beyond. Speaking of seeds, thank you for the opportunity to share our first citizen science project. And we look forward to answering any questions you may have about our experience. Thank you so much, Rebecca. I'm now going to hand it off to Marielle to share a little bit about our future initiative, which, if I'm correct, would be more of a participatory variety selection project rather than a participatory plant breeding project, as the last one was.
Great, thanks so much, Tyler. So yes, we are very excited to announce that CTAR, in partnership with the Hawaii Seed Growers Network and Seeds of Honua, is going to be hosting the second Citizen Seed cohort in the fall of this year. So we'll be focusing on evaluating sugar pea cultivars to help identify varieties to offer through the Hawaii Seed Growers Network online marketplace in the future. We plan to compare Hawaii bred seeds like Manoa Sugar and Manoa C to other industry standard varieties such as Oregon Giant and potentially other promising heat tolerant varieties with the help of our CTAR team, including James, who you heard from today. So if anyone here is interested in joining us for this next cohort, I'm gonna drop a link in the chat for an interest form that you could fill out so we can get your contact info. And also, if anyone has suggestions for varieties that you found to perform well in Hawaii, we'd love to hear about that as we develop our list of trial varieties. We're really looking forward to working with members of our previous cohort, as well as new participants on this really exciting project. So with that, we can open up for some questions if anybody has any input. Thanks.
If anybody, has any questions for Marielle and Tyler, or for James and Emily, we've got a little bit of time here now, and then I'm going to also post in the chat a link to a session that their video was part of at the Organic Seed Growers Conference put on by OSA in February, that has some other great examples of community participatory projects from around the country. But right now, we'd love to know if anybody's got any questions for these guys. Feel free to put it in the chat or raise your hand, and we can unmute you. I have a question, which is that pea that Jim Myers just put in the chat going to be in the trial?
We can certainly add that to our list. I think we're going to be working pretty closely with the Seed Growers Network and with our CTAR team to develop that list, as well as working on growing out some of the seed that we'll be using for the Hawaii bred varieties. If nobody has any questions, I know I could put James on the spot to talk about any ideas that he has about how we're going to start looking for other varieties to include, in case that's interesting to anybody. I think we're lucky to have James. He's got a lot of great experience with peas, and so we might be able to find some cool things to include. But yeah, if any of you have experience growing peas, I know for myself, it's going to be a new crop for me. I'd love to hear what's kind of standard for you for home gardeners or farmers, if you've been growing sugar peas in the past.
I just wanted to comment on that. We probably need to separate the bush types from the trellis types. I kind of lean more towards the bush types because we're in a windy area and you can use hog panels to just grow them on. And there are probably less bush types, but Jim Myers is going to talk pretty soon. And I know he's developed some varieties recently, so he can talk about that. Another source of seeds would be Alan Capular pea seeds. I think he developed about 3 or 4 different varieties of snow peas in the last 5 years or so. So that's another source of varieties.
Thank you, Glenn. Looks like Jim has his hand up, and then there are 2 questions in the chat. So Jim.
Okay, I don't want to take too much time for the questions, but I'll just comment on the peas. The Sweet Gem is actually, Jay tested that some years back under the number S1430. And I don't know if that's still floating around in Hawaii anyplace, but there's that one. There's also a snow pea that we've released, but nobody's picked it up commercially yet. And we'd be happy to put that in your trial and see if that works. To me, it's kind of like, well, both of these are tall vines, so not what Glenn wants, but they're the sort of thing that need to be trellised, but they're very indeterminate, so you get a lot of pickings off of them. And
Great.
the snow pea is a kind of a replacement for mammoth melting sugar.
Looks like you have a question, James, by Nancy. She asked, are there any participatory plant breeding projects started yet at CTAR? And were those beautiful F2P flowers Sweet Gem?
Yeah, thanks, Nancy. I was just trying to catch up in the chat. We've proposed a few participatory plant breeding projects before, but there'd been some kind of administrative pushback with that. And I don't want to get into all of that here. But we're hopeful that we can kind of get some going with some kind of more common crops. I already have some tomatillo crosses. That's something that local master gardeners have asked me about. And they're fun and easy to work with because they can't pollinate themselves, so you get some great variation. We had one real standout cultivar that did really well, so we're hopeful we can kind of get some other characteristics into that. And those photos were actually from a cross I did years ago between a standard kind of snow pea and a wild species of pea. Both were really small plants, and the F1 I think was 8 feet tall, and then the offspring were kind of all over the map. But I'm hopeful the wild species of pea is actually native to the Middle East, and so it has a lot of great heat tolerance. So hopeful that we can see if we can get some of those good genetics in while still keeping some of the great flavor characteristics. And while I'm unmuted, I was also going to say one project that I was involved in briefly during my PhD, but I know Dr. Jim Myers has been involved in for a while, was Nobic, where they were looking at breeding organic crops for northern areas. They did a heat-tolerant pea trial, and I think I've communicated this kind of through email back and forth with Marielle and Michelle and a few other folks. We planted peas in upstate New York in the beginning of June and harvested them beginning to middle of July when it's around 90 degrees outside. Not as many of the disease pressures in some ways, but it was a real spectrum of peas that got 2 or 3 inches tall and died, and others that kept bearing all summer long. So I know we identified at least 3 from that trial that we're going to be working on. And Michelle has also indicated some interest in talking with the World Vegetable Center in Taiwan that I know has done some work in the past. And Taiwan, separate from the World Vegetable Center, has also released some tropical peas recently. So I know those were kind of on our radar. But as Mario said, anyone has some experience with a different cultivar that does well for them, please reach out to us and let us know.
Thank you so much, James. There's a final question in the chat relating to the citizen science project. Lindsay asks, what were some of the requirements needed to be accepted to the last cohort? And as Marielle responded, we just had a mandatory meeting, and the attendees that came to that mandatory meeting were automatically mailed seed. They did not need to technically have any previous garden experience, though we would advise that. And for future cohorts, we're still kind of formulating what those requirements would be. Glenn or Mario, would you like to add anything to that?
Nope, you got it. Just we had no requirements in terms of how people were growing them. We had some people in containers, some people in the ground. All of that is fine. I think the nature of these kind of projects, we know we're going to have a lot of different ways of growing, and that's fine. This is one of the benefits of doing a project like this. I think we get to see how these things are going to perform in a lot of different conditions. And hopefully that'll give us some cool insights.
Yeah, I think you want them to be able to grow under you want to create a variety for their conditions, whatever it may be, in the pot, on the veranda, on an apartment building. That's what we had in our project.
And to answer Diane's question, we don't yet have a date for when the second cohort will start, but we're thinking probably September to November time period, something like that. We'd like to align with the school year so that our school garden educators can participate. So that will be a factor in choosing our start time.
Thank you so much, everyone. I'm gonna hand it back off to Jay.
Thank you all. That is lots of fun, inspiring work going on. We had scheduled a little break, but I think we're gonna skip that and jump right into Dr. Michael Cantar's presentation. James alluded to there being few breeders left at the University of Hawaii. And I think because we heard from Richard Manshart a little bit yesterday, he has retired. Michael Cantar may be the last breeder standing at the University of Hawaii, if I'm not mistaken, at least for edible food crops. Dr. Kantar has quite a legacy to help carry on, and he's teaching students about breeding. And so he's going to give us an update of some of the projects that he's working on with others. So thanks for coming, Mikey.
Well, thanks for having me, and thanks for the great talks. Super fun to hear what's going on. We do still have other folks working in breeding, though I do think you may be right in that mine is the only job description that is edible food crops, because of course we have some great ornamental breeders in Tessie and Ken. But I think you may be right. And so it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me. And I'm just going to tell you kind of two stories of ongoing breeding projects on two very different crops, but hopefully you'll be entertained. So the first one is pepper. So let's talk about pepper. As you can see from this photo, I mean, there's a lot of diversity that we know about. It's one of the most culturally accepted foods. People love it everywhere. These 101 peppers come from a study that was, amusing to me at any rate, called Cruella Scoville, right? Because Scoville is the heat index. These were all, and we were looking at 101. But we were using this to really look at chili nutrition. And so of all these 101 types, it turns out pepper is really, really nutritious. So what you're seeing on this graph is on the left here, these are pepper varieties where if you have a single normal serving of the pepper, in this case, that would be our far left line here, you're getting your entire daily requirement in one serving of pepper for vitamin A, vitamin C, or folate. And so one of the things that we immediately saw when we were looking at this is we were thinking, okay, pepper's super nutritious, there's a lot of diversity, and there's a lot of variation for this, because obviously you can see some that have almost no vitamin content. But one of the things that it turned out when we started thinking about this and doing it is that there were a lot of peppers. Peppers were not, they did not have the same nutrition content. There weren't things that were really high in vitamin A, vitamin C, and folate. And they were actually from different species in a lot of cases. So what's kind of fun about pepper, at least to me, so I apologize for showing graphs and not pictures of plants, but one of the things that's really nice, and what you're seeing here, is that there's a lot of different pepper species, and they all appear to be in very distinct, so what this graph is just genetic space. So imagine it of a map, not a genetic map, but just where people live in the world of genetic space. So what we have is we have our anum, which is one of our major species. We have our chinense, which is the other major species. We have bacatum, which is another species. But all these species, one of the things that's super great about all of these species is you can cross them. So if we go back into the history of pepper, we can cross all of these different species. So if we think about the diversity that I showed you in that first picture, what does that mean? It means that all of these different species are available for us to cross. So what has that meant for us looking for trying to create more and more nutritious peppers? Well, what it's actually done, which has been really, really fun, is we've taken collections. So this is in collaboration with UNAM, the University in Mexico City, and Ohio State, where we've collected wild peppers of a number of different species from all across Mexico, and we've crossed them to a huge range of peppers from North America to look for really cool, both nutritional and some drought tolerance as well. So you have, here's a picture in Mexico of just a wild pepper growing in a forest there. And then of course your pepper flower. And then here are some of the progeny of some of our crosses, right? And we're actually seeing quite a bit of variation. So one of the things that's been really cool about working with pepper is we think about, again, a bit what James was talking about in terms of the wild species, but here we're crossing in, we're making crosses with 5 or 6 different species, and we're getting stuff that looks really good. And not surprisingly, genetics from the tropics in these wild collections from Mexico do really well here in the tropics in Hawaii. So that's been kind of fun. And just kind of another kind of look of, because we're, you know, packaging seed and sending it all over the place. Here's some fruit that we just harvested about a week ago. And currently there, you know, there's about 8 populations that are what we call it an F4, so that have been selfed for 4 generations after the initial cross, and then there are some that are still at the F1 stage, and it's been really interesting. So this is one aspect of this project where we're crossing with the wild species, trying to identify things that really can be high in all of those vitamins that we saw were really high in that diversity panel. But I mentioned as a sideline, one of the things that we're obviously also really interested in is heat and drought tolerance. And so to do that, we've been lucky enough to work with the World Vegetable Center in Taiwan that was just mentioned, and their pepper breeder, Derek. So what they're doing is they get the coolest toys. So what you're seeing is their robot field in Taiwan, right outside the World Veg Center there, where every day, actually I believe it's 3 times a day, they take through these 3-dimensional photos of the plant, of every single plant across the entire field. And what they do then is this is what's called their core collection. So the World Vegetable Center has about 15,000 different pepper varieties. The core collection is about 380 of those varieties that encompass 90% of the total genetic diversity present in those 15,000 varieties. So the reason they create the core collection is because even though 380 is a lot, it's a whole lot less than 15,000. And so this lets them explore the collection in an easier way. But what ends up happening is when you take these super cool pictures, you end up trying to ask some questions. And one of the questions that they're asking is, how well can a computer tell how well will a computer's intuition match a breeder's intuition? And so what do we mean by that? When you get these pictures, you get hundreds and hundreds of measurements, too many for a person to look at individually. So then we have to end up using different computer learning methods, machine learning methods to look at it. And so we get some fun outputs that here are just an example of things that are really, really unpleasant to look at, but have a really simple interpretation. So what ends up happening is we can look at, in this case, genetic similarity. In this case, we can look at the similarity in the response to heat. And this one is actually the one that even though it's just a jumble of numbers and colors, becomes really interesting to us, because if you see this overlap between the blue and the green, what that tells us is when we feed all of that information, all of the hundreds, well, the thousands of images that were taken over the growing season in well-watered and drought conditions, these ones that are overlap here actually do not perform differently when there's drought and when they're well watered. So now what we've done there, and it turns out there's actually 19 that are in that overlap. So what it turns out is those 19 become target parents to use in crosses that Derek is making and that UC Davis is making, and that hopefully will be growing out here in the fall. But so now we have crosses that we can grow out here, and so instead of looking at 15,000 different potential parents, or even the 380, we're looking at 19. And I don't know about all of you, but I get really scared of numbers that are 10,000, 20,000, 15,000. I even get scared of 200-300, but I like 19. That seems like a nice number. So the thing that's really cool about that is we've been able to work with folks all across the world: Taiwan, Mexico, California, Ohio, even some folks in London. And so now we get to play with all these different crosses with tropical material. I know that's a little bit out there, and I know it's not necessarily some of the things that we're most interested in. So I'm going to tell you a second story here about sweet potato. So this is stuff that I'm sure Jay is quite familiar with. I'm going to talk to you about some work that's being led by Ted Radovich, so Dr. Ted Radovich over at Waimanalo, and in partnership with a local nonprofit. So this work is being done at the Waimanalo Learning Center. It's being done with the Waimanalo Pono Research Hui. And again, this is work that's basically been ongoing there for a long time, that I've had the privilege to be able to help out with a little bit. So this all started about, I want to say 5 or 6 years ago, with some serendipitous seed. What I mean by that is Ted was exploring heirloom Hawaiian cultivars. So cultivars that are Hawaiian sweet potatoes. And he was growing them up at the Pomoho Research Center. And it just turned out there was a ton of flowering among the trial that year, and we got some seeds. So for those of you that don't know, sweet potato is an obligate outcrossing plant that is bee pollinated. It is very difficult to hand pollinate by humans. Bees are great at it. They're much, much better at it than we are. So typically, it's really, really hard to generate seed in the absence of having these favorable conditions. So we had kind of this serendipitous seed, and we harvested it off of a Hawaiian cultivar named Mohihi. So there were some initial trials where we just grew out all of the seed. And what you can see here is, what some of the plants looked like when we transplanted them. And here, when we just laid out all of the different, these would be, in this case, that initial cross. These are all of these plants would be half siblings. With the maternal parent would be Mohihi. We actually have no idea who the father was in these crosses. It could have been any of the other 12 or any of the other 11 plants or lines that were grown in that trial. And so we just kind of went through and picked out ones that we liked. As you can see, some look really nice. Some look like complete trash with no tubers. So, it's sometimes it's easy. Obviously I want to keep everything, and I have to be told, no, we can't keep everything. So I'm sure James has, can commiserate with wanting to keep everything. So we picked out of those, we picked a bunch of our 12 favorite. And we grew them out in some controlled trials, both at Waimanalo and Pomoho. And it turns out we had a couple that were really, really good. So in this case, our Okinawan is our commercial check. And in both of our environments, we had these guys who really performed better. The HM26 and the HM34. And so we're really excited about those. The HM34 really looks quite a lot like the Okinawan. The HM26 is a monster. It does not taste very good, but we're hoping to use it maybe for brewing. However, there were two that I personally really liked, and also Ted. So we kept them, even though they were not the greatest yielders. I'm particularly excited about this HM17. So these lines are really interesting, and we're really excited about this. But working in these brings up some really important questions about IP. You know, historically, universities have behaved very badly. There's been a history of biopiracy, of, you know, disrespecting traditional knowledge. Currently, the US is a signatory of the International Plant Genetic Resources Treaty, which outlines farmers' rights. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer those. And so this causes different institutional goals in terms of universities as are trying to find ongoing streams of royalties to compete, to keep breeding programs going. The current standard across the country is to have these royalties go to programs rather than inventors. In the case of the sweet potato, the IP is going to belong to the nonprofit. And UH has just done that in partnership with them. So we're still trying to figure out about the best way of doing that. There are a new set, well, I guess not new now, there are a new set of procedures that UH is following with respect to variety release. There are different procedures with respect to canoe plants versus non-Hawaiian crops. And if anyone is interested in that, I'm happy to talk more or send you the document. The reason they are not policies is because policies are at UH, and I'm sorry for the inside baseball here, but the policies are a collectively bargained aspect of the contracts of university employees with the university, while a procedure is something that is not collectively bargained and can be administratively driven. So again, happy to talk to those more or to share that document with anyone, which is currently housed at the Office of Technology Transfer. And happy to talk more broadly about IP. I saw a question in the chat earlier about that, because I've been lucky enough to work with some folks, particularly Bill Tracy, who I know has been out here in the past and done extensive work on this. So with that, I'm going to leave you with some really pretty pictures of sweet potatoes. My favorite is the one of the bee going into the flower. But yeah, with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. And, you know, thanks so much for having me here. And I hope you enjoyed these two small stories about some of the ongoing breeding here.
Thanks so much, Mikey. Does anyone have any questions for Mikey before we split up into some breakout sessions? We've got a technical question here from Jim Myers asking if you cross Chinensis and Bacatum, and if so, what are the flavor volatiles like?
So we have. It does not work well, that cross. And we haven't actually tested the flavor volatiles like the unfortunately, our food scientist on the project recently left his university and is now working in the private sector. So we're trying to recruit a new one because I would really love to know that as well. Yeah, and so it is. I think it would be really. What I would love to see is tomato is so far ahead of the game as opposed to pepper, where you have the whole kind of way of understanding flavor. I think pepper needs to understand flavor in that same way, with some more of that subtlety, Because right now what I see in a lot of pepper flavors, basically it's a lot of it is just in response to that heat. And I think we want to move beyond solely heat as a way of kind of determining that. So for the potatoes that are weevil resistant, no. What we are working with, basically, it's cultural practices to avoid weevils. The material that we have is not been selected for weevil resistance. It has mainly been, I mean, indirectly it is, I would say, because if you don't have weevil resistance, you don't have any yield, but not in any direct way. With the cassava, that we, SIAT, basically, the folks at SIAT, wanted to, or basically were no longer really interested in the project that I was helping them with, and so I'm not really doing that. I'm sorry, I don't have a picture of a sweet potato seed pod. Let's see. Yeah, and oh, great, James, you have some some weevil resistant sweet potatoes. That's awesome. And Glenn, you're exactly right. The Hawaiian ones are much more susceptible than the Okinawans, and we noticed that particularly. So again, as we didn't have our, so we were doing this all on the certified organic land at Waimanalo. For the trials there, because obviously Ted is running Ted is the lead on the project, so we were growing them on the organic land because we specifically want them to work in the organic environments. And one of the things that we saw in we did that trial in 2018, and then we tried to follow it up right away with a trial the following year in 2019 at Waimanalo, and we didn't have enough spatial distance or enough temporal distance between them. And that basically that trial got completely shut down by weevils. Mm-hmm. And that was us. I mean, really our issue there is we really wanted to do it on the certified organic land. And that was just a big mistake from us because we didn't have that, we didn't have the time. And the reason we didn't do more temporal change was because the student who was working on it, right, had to graduate. So, yeah. But yeah, Jay saw those. The first crop was great. The second crop was sad, very sad.
Well, thank you, Mikey, for that information, and hopefully you can stick around, and we'll see if folks have some more questions coming up in the chat.